Very good. Thank you so much. I find myself in a difficult position without video, repeating some of the learnings that previously has been showcased. And on top of that, my boss is going to give it a showcase of what we actually do. So, I'm stuck with meaningless slides between, the closing of the session and so forth. Anyway, I found the title and the topic extremely interesting. Most of all because we sometimes seem to agree that innovation labs are not actually that cool, especially in the finance industry. This quote or theme comes from the 11FS podcast. They are the most popular fintech podcast at the moment, and that's the statement that their audience is giving. Why is that? Why is innovation labs having a bad name? So I actually went to my LinkedIn and started to do research, and after some 20,000 views, I actually got some interesting responses. And while reading them, I got a sentiment that there's a theme that repeats. So I want to introduce my 7 as well at the opportunity. The 7 deadly sins of innovation labs. And the first one is lust. We lust for innovation so much that we forget the purpose of why the innovation lab exists. So it ceases to do ROI. It loses the connection with the business, as we so repeatedly heard. The second problem is gluttony, which leads to the fact that we also discussed earlier. Focus only on the technology, not the problems that it's supposed to solve. Not a focus at all on the people who we're doing the innovation for. Now you get the drill. Third one is greed. The greed is expressed in many ways. You can have the opposite of lust in a way that you focus solely on the ROI and you forget the more important stuff. On the other hand, if you get high on the innovation lab drug, you may seek a carte blanche that is totally disattached from the business, again leading to a number of pitfalls. Then we have sloth. And it comes in different variations. Sometimes running an innovation lab is an excuse for not doing your job properly. So we end up being sloppy. We may run meaningless hackathons, not to discourage anyone. The hackathons definitely have a purpose. But this was a well-spoken comment in my books. Like somebody running a hackathon was making a deduction that we've done with the innovation. The fifth problem we have is wrath. We hate everybody else so much that we end up building everything by ourselves. Now, there were great examples we heard today that you can achieve quite a bit by partnering, by buying, not building things ourselves. But this typically comes up in innovation labs. We focus only on the building part. Then we have envy. Again, many forms are expressed, but I guess the fundamental flaw, again addressed already today, is that the innovation labs are totally invisible from the business units. They live a life of their own, and I guess it was represented in this example here. Also, hiring extremes is related to the envy. Sticking only on a certain kind of people, lacking that diversity, can lead into many different problems. And finally, the 7th extreme is pride. Inflated expectations is kind of one symbol of having too much pride on the whole innovation lab agenda, but also having the big plan without actually, any stepping stones, lacking all sorts of realism because you think that you're so great. So, while reading through the comments and making this deduction that it's basically like the 7 deadly sins, I realized that this topic of managing versus adaptability is actually a problem of extremes. We tend to go all the way into 11 or to 0, and we don't really have a balance. And I think the solution really to having a success with innovation labs is to find that striking balance between different extremes. And therefore, to end my presentation, there's 7 ways to run a balanced innovation lab, clearly. First of all, it should be entrepreneurial, yet corporate compliant. And what I mean by that is that there are different phases in innovation projects where the different tools are more relevant. In the beginning of a new project, you should be startup mindset, you should be nimble, you should focus only on the problem, and incrementally you should take different and bigger risks. And how that happens in reality is that you have to be more and more corporate compliant the bigger risks that you're taking, because nobody wants to have a burning platform in a big finance company. So that's actually something that we've been trying to do in our innovation lab, trying to blend these two modes of working together. Kind of related point, we should be collaborative, yet remain independent. Again, the sort of collaborative spirit, towards the end of the cycle of an innovation you get, when it gets to the phase where you're scaling it, that's where you need your friends in the mothership. Unless you have them, you're pretty much screwed. However, in the early days, you kind of need to be independent as well. If you ask for approval for everybody, you're not going to go anywhere. And that's where the sponsor's point really comes to play. You need a sponsor to be able to execute on that journey. Thirdly, I believe that you have to strike a balance between having resources and not having them. And what I mean by that is that, of course, you need to have those moonshots, but nearly always when you're getting started in the innovation cycle, you can settle for a lot less resources, and the scarcity brings the opportunity. We heard the phrase, if it's going to be big, it most often starts off like a toy. So focusing on a smaller than we feel comfortable often is a great way to get started. And that reminds me the quote by Apple. They have infinite resources, obviously, but key to their innovation strategy is being able to say no. And when you have less resources, you tend to say no more often. Fourth point where we need balance is the sense of urgency. And kind of the contradiction here is that when you start from scratch, it takes at least 5 to 7 years before you break even. In a startup or in a corporate life, in a blank sheet of paper, starting from there. Of course, when we have those existing resources, we can leverage them, having an access to the customers helps, but the reality is that innovation takes time, and your sponsor better understand this. Also, the contradiction to the previous statement is that we shouldn't let the innovation projects run forever, but we should be active in holding them liable for the progress they make, or the lack of. And if the projects are not making progress, then we better off kill them at the beginning. Fifth sort of thing to strike a balance is that we always look for the brightest minds to join the innovation labs, but the fact is that we need people who are willing to grind as well, and often they're not the same person. So the reason why we need that talent is that we often change the course of a direction for the innovation, so we need people who are able to move along with the idea. However, when we get to the business part, it's all about that grinding. So you need a mixture of people who can operate and run a business as well. Sixth point is to do things, yet be willing to partner. And I would say that it's really hard to partner if you don't understand why you're doing the partnering for. And the only way we've learned to learn about the insights is by doing stuff. And once you have that insight, then you're of course free to partner up. And seventh and last point is to start outside the box, but be willing to do only what is needed. Again, one of those difficult things to find a balance. Often when you're starting on a blank sheet of paper, you want to redo everything, even though that's not entirely necessary. So we've found a good practice to stop and restart and think again if we can utilize some of the existing resources. Fundamentally, few of the best innovations out there recently are only incrementally better than the current alternatives. You don't need to innovate in every single dimension, just one or few is enough. So that's 7 ways to find a balance. You can be entrepreneurial, you have to be collaborative, you have to be independent all at the same time. However, I think the final point that requires balance is also the results. The average lifespan of an innovation lab is roughly 2 years. Unless you show results in that time, you're done. However, we understand the 5 to 7 year limitation, so you should try to find some immediate results as well as invest those seeds for the longer term to have really sustainable results. So those were my 7 points and 2 cents. Thank you.